Together we learn, together we grow, together we heal, together we flow. Be cool, every teacher, every school. 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 Be cool.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Thompson. I serve as the lead learner for the SCEA Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. We call ourselves Cool, and you can find out everything you want to know about us right here on this website at cool.us. That's CEWL.us. All of our live streams are eventually posted to the website, along with retreat opportunities, information about our Cool Induction Institute, our Cool Coaching Program, and so much more. So I want to encourage everybody to just head on over to the Cool website and check us out. Also, we are brought to you in part by a grant from NEA, and the SCEA is NEA's state affiliate here in South Carolina. We're proud to be partnered with them. And if you're interested in joining our movement in South Carolina, you can do that at jointhescea.org. I'm very excited about tonight's guest. Tonight, we are joined by two folks from an organization called Good Jobs First, a national policy resource center that promotes corporate and government accountability in economic development. Since 1988, it has fought for reforms. Sorry, lost my track there. It has fought for reforms to increase transparency around the use of public money used in the name of economic development, and has revealed the numerous ways corporations, many of whom receive subsidies, violate civil and criminal regulations and laws. Anya Gizis is a research analyst at Good Jobs First. She joined the organization in 2021 as an intern and became a full-time employee. In 2023, she received her bachelor's in economics and government from Georgetown University, where she focused her studies on labor rights and economic justice. We're also joined by Jeremy Thompson, who began researching and critiquing economic development incentives in graduate school, studying tax increment financing in Illinois. And after more than 15 years as a senior researcher and campaigner in and around the labor movement, he joined Good Jobs First in 2024 as a research director. So without further ado, let's welcome Anya and Jeremy. How are you doing tonight?
Good, thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So let's start here with Good Jobs First and the bios. Is there anything else you want to share about the organization and about your own career, your own background?
Let's see. I don't know. What do you want to know about our backgrounds?
Well, what is it that, in your experience, that led you to want to do this work around justice, around the idea of corporations sort of paying their fair share? I know in South Carolina, we have a lot of corporations are brought in with the incentive of, we're going to have really low tax rates or no taxes at all for a while. And then the impact that has on schools, the impact that has on communities. What is it specifically that got you into this work?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So I'm originally from Philadelphia, where it's a heavy labor city. So I was always around issues around economic justice. But I went to Philadelphia public schools, which Good Jobs First revealed that the year that I graduated high school, Philadelphia public schools lost more than $100 million to tax abatements in that same year. And so we didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have textbooks. We didn't have anything like that. Nothing. Our teachers every year were striking for higher raises. And so finding out from Good Jobs First that money was going to big corporate tax breaks instead of public services and especially education was really eye-opening for me, just on how the system is broken. And so that's really inspired me in my work to make sure that public services and education especially are getting fully funded and that the government is prioritizing these services over corporate welfare.
Nice. Jeremy?
Yeah, I actually started studying, as my bio said, started studying economic development incentives in graduate school. That was about over 20 years ago. I admittedly can't remember exactly what motivated me to want to do that, but I do remember specifically in my application essay kind of, wanting to understand tax incentives and why governments were so eager and willing to give away lots of money and demand so little in return. I interned for Good Jobs First in graduate school, and then I became a union researcher where, kind of corporate accountability was the name of the game. And then I had the opportunity to come back to Good Jobs First and kind of, come full circle on my, pursuit of justice when it came to economic development incentives. Since I'm really excited to be here, I was super excited to work on this report with Anya. She did most of the work. I helped her out in the background. And it's great to see, the union taking our work and trying to run with it.
So let's now talk specifically about Good Jobs First. You heard I got that off of your website, the description about your organization. But what is it that you would like folks in South Carolina to know about the work that you're doing in Good Jobs First as it applies to the state of South Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, so we'll get into some of this in the presentation, but a lot of states, a lot of cities are reluctant to or lazy about, I don't know, unwilling to maybe disclose details about billions of dollars that flow from governments to corporations and economic development incentives. Unfortunately, South Carolina is one of the least transparent states. So I think one thing that we'll kind of highlight in the presentation, and one thing that I know you all are doing, is demanding more transparency, right? Transparency is kind of the beginning of the game, not the end of the game. At the end of the game, it's like accountability, funding our schools. But in order for people to kind of know what's going on, be able to kind of fight the fight, they need the information.
Right.
And as you'll see on a couple of our slides, it's hard in states like South Carolina to get that information.
So one of the questions that I have as I think about this issue is it seems like it's a really, I don't know if catch-22 is the right word, but it's really difficult because if you're a state that says, we're going to insist that a corporation pay their fair share of taxes if they're going to be operating in the state, and another state, maybe a neighboring state or a state, a couple of states away, says, hey, you can come here and you don't need to pay all those taxes, and then that company moves to that state, and then the governor or state legislators can say, hey, look, so we were attracting, these businesses here, and we're creating good jobs, supposedly. What's the sort of the problem with that dynamic, and how can that be overcome?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem, and we don't deny the kind of politics of this situation. There are some states, kind of Missouri and Kansas most famously, that have struck a deal to kind of avoid the sort of binds you're talking about, where they basically kind of agree at the border area. I think in those two states, it's like a 7-county region, which basically says, like, look, this fight is stupid. It's hurting us both. We're going to, kind of call it off for several years. And they passed legislation in one state, an executive order in another state, basically agreeing to, kind of call off this kind of fight. We call it the war between the states. I know that in Missouri and Kansas, they're re-upping legislation to try to continue that. So that's certainly one important solution, is just kind of waiting for elected officials to realize how wasteful, inefficient all of this energy and money going into these subsidies is. The other thing is it's just a question of getting people engaged on this issue with, vehicles like this live stream and like SCEA's engagement. We're 8 or 9 people, working in a policy shop. We can provide the tools, we can provide the kind of, set of demands, but really we can't mobilize and organize. That's for the kind of local organizations like the SCEA to help do.
Yeah. So is there a bit of a mirage in terms of when a state says, hey, we brought in this new company, and they're going to create all these new jobs, but they're not really paying their fair share of taxes? What exactly is a typical impact in a situation like that, and what should folks know so they're not misinformed and thinking, oh, this is a great thing that this new company, and I don't want to call out any specific corporation, but when a corporation comes in like that and it's celebrated, and yet underneath all of that is a use of resources and really not paying their fair share in taxes, what should voters and sort of citizens realize is happening there? And I know that's kind of a general question, and there's a lot of variations and specifics, but what is specifically happening that people should be concerned about?
Anya told you about her experience in Philadelphia. She can probably talk about the teacher shortage in South Carolina as well.
Yeah, and just beyond just the findings from this report, the tax incentives that a company gets isn't going to be the only reason that it moves to a particular area. There's a lot of other things that go into those calculations that companies are making, including where it is geographically, how easy it is to ship their product, how easy it is to work with, if it's a factory making the wheels, how easy it is to get the other parts it needs to make whatever the final product is. And another part of that is having an educated workforce. So when a company locates somewhere, it wants to be able to hire people in that area. It wants to be able to hire well-educated people. And so if there are all of these corporate deals where they're not funding schools, there's going to be less money for the education, and it's going to be worse quality of workers. So, when it's the tax incentives are a small drop in the bucket of why these corporations make these decisions. And so it's important to look at the bigger picture and to make sure that public services aren't being neglected in favor of these large corporations.
Okay. And I know you have a presentation you wanted to share. Let's go ahead and bring that up and talk through some of the points that you wanted to make sure you shared tonight.
Yeah.
Pull that up. There we go.
All right, so we can glide through some of these beginning slides here just because we've covered a lot of this information. But like I said, I'm Anya Gizis. I was the lead author on the cost of tax abatements on South Carolina public schools. And Jeremy and I will be going over our findings from this study and looking through some of the resources on our website. And so next slide.
Jeremy, do you have control of that presentation?
Yeah, it says $95 billion per year.
Right. For us right now, it's still stuck on the cost of tax abatements, not in present mode.
Pull that off for now and see if we can get that going. Did you click present on it on your end? Because on our end, we're just seeing. Try it again.
Okay. What were you seeing?
We were just seeing the first slide, but like not in presentation mode.
Oh.
Now, yeah. Just if you'll share again, we'll try it again.
Sure.
Okay. So we're seeing. Yeah. Now we're seeing the second. Now we're seeing the fourth slide.
Okay.
Still not in present mode.
Yeah. Not sure why that's happening. There we go. If you could, click from the beginning. There you go. Up. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Does not appear to be working. Oh, there you go. Well, can you go over to can you see where it's, there you go. Try that.
Try what?
Click that right there. Click where you are. For some reason, that's not working. On our end, all we see is the fourth slide.
Which is the fourth slide? What's the text?
The tax abatement disclosure.
Okay. What do you see now?
Same thing.
Huh. So there's a lag of some sort, I guess.
I suppose so. Not sure why that's doing that. So I think the best thing for us to do is if you can maybe talk through it. I know it'd be nice to have the slides, but if you can sort of talk through each slide, I don't know, Anya, if you have a copy of that presentation. See, now it seems to be working. Whatever you just did, it went to the second slide.
But now it's a not presentation. Now it's not in slides mode.
It's not in. It's not. It's showing the thumbnails on the left and then the main slide. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't in slides mode the whole time, so maybe we can just click through.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So
Working.
So we will go over the what Good Jobs First has on our website, including our 3 databases: Subsidy Tracker, Violation Tracker, and Tax Break Tracker, which I run. And Jeremy will be going over a little bit more of that. And just for context, each year this country spends about $95 billion on economic development. This can take many forms, but for the purpose of this presentation, what we are most concerned with are property tax abatements. As you may know, property taxes make up the majority of many school districts' local funding. So when there are big tax breaks on property tax bills, schools end up having their funding hurt. So next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the data that makes this report possible. In 2017, a new accounting rule came into effect called GASB 77 that specifies that jurisdictions must disclose the amount of revenue they forego every year to tax abatement disclosures. And they have to put this in their annual comprehensive financial report, which is their annual audit. Good Jobs First advocated for the adoption of this accounting rule, and we love to use this to show communities and residents just how much their cities, counties, libraries, schools, etc. are losing to big corporate tax breaks. What's really important about this data is we are collecting it from school districts directly. This is not math that we are calculating. We are taking it exactly from their annual comprehensive financial reports. This data is relatively crude, but for the first time ever, it exists. And usually they won't do the corporate recipients. They will just do a dollar figure per program per year. And what's really exciting about this data is that passive losers must also disclose how much they lose. And what I mean by that is that even if a school district is not the body that enters into a tax abatement agreement, if their revenue is affected, they must also report those losses. So let's look at an example from Berkeley County School District, which you all might be familiar with. Looking at their ACFR, and I know it's a little bit small, so I'll just read it here, what it says. They write, the school district does not negotiate or enter into any agreements for tax abatements. The school district is subject to tax abatement agreements entered into by Berkeley County. So the school district itself isn't signing anything into law. It's just subject to the deals that Berkeley County is doing. And then it continues. The county abated school district property revenues of $88 million, and this was just in the year 2024. So without any say in the process, Berkeley County School District lost almost $100 million in a single year. And to see another example of how this works, we can look at a slide from the Office of New Mexico State Auditor. So this is a hypothetical $1,000 Bernalillo County property tax abatement. And in New Mexico, like South Carolina, counties are the bodies that enter into tax abatement agreements. So when Bernalillo County offers this $1,000 to a corporation, it's not just their money they're offering. They're offering money from every slice of this pie. And so that includes the city of Albuquerque, the hospital district, the community college, the state itself, and most importantly to us, the public schools. So the county is putting in these agreements, but everyone is affected, and all of these slices of the pie would have to report how much they are losing in their financials. And so now that we have this background, we can take a look at the findings of our report. This is our 3rd study looking at tax abatement losses for school districts in South Carolina. And as you can see, as reported from the Post and Courier, we found that between 2017 and 2023, school districts in South Carolina lost more than $3.2 billion to tax abatements. Next slide. So for this study, we looked at all active school districts in the state, which was 71 school districts in 2023, which was the latest year that tax abatement data was widely available. Looking at this data over time, we can see that in 2017, school districts lost $326 million, and that has grown to $542 million in 2023, with, like I said, a total loss of $3.2 billion in just 7 years. Slide. When dividing these tax abatement losses by all of the districts across the state, we can see that the average district lost $5.3 million in 2017, which is up to almost $9 million in 2023. And I also want to specify that all of the numbers that we are looking at now are net tax abatement losses. So this is including any offsetting revenue that they're getting. So now let's take a look at some of the counties that had the highest losses. As we saw earlier, Berkeley County School District lost an average of $70 million per year between 2017 and 2023. In total, Berkeley County School District lost $562 million over these 7 years. Looking at Subsidy Tracker, which Jeremy is going to walk us through a little bit more, which looks at the corporate database, looks at the corporations receiving these deals, we know that Volvo got a $200 million subsidy in 2015. Us at Good Jobs First also know that Berkeley County has data centers owned by Google, which we can estimate to be costing the county tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Data center subsidies are particularly harmful to communities because of their large environmental impact and the lack of jobs that they create. Next slide. Another school district, Spartanburg 5, lost more than $100 million to tax abatements in just 1 year. This is the second largest loss we have ever seen at Good Jobs First for a single school district in a single year. Looking again at the subsidy tracker entries for Spartanburg County, we can see several large deals given to BMW, first starting in 1992 all the way up to 2022. Next slide. And so, like I said earlier, tax abatement deals in South Carolina are done largely on the county level and are mostly through these three programs. The largest and most costly of these programs is fee in lieu of taxes, or violates. In this, if a company makes a minimum investment, they can pay a violate instead of their full property tax bill. This means that they pay a deeply discounted rate and that these deals can last for up to 40 years. The other two programs, special source revenue credits and multi-county industrial parks, are often given in conjunction with violate deals for building certain expansions or locating in certain areas. If you are interested in learning more about the specifics of these programs, there's a section in the report that goes into much more detail. Next slide. So now let's think a little bit more about the opportunity costs, or what this money could have gone to if it didn't go to corporate welfare. Looking across the state, we see that on average, the per pupil loss to tax abatements was $450 in 2017, up to $727 in 2023. That means without these massive tax breaks, there could have been almost $750 more in funding for each student in South Carolina in 2023 alone. Next slide. And as you all may know, South Carolina has long been suffering from a teacher shortage with over 1,400 open positions in 2023. Looking at the cost of these tax abatements, it's clear where the solution to this problem could lie. Between 2017 and 2022, using the average instructor compensation, which is salary plus benefits, an average of 6,600 instructors could have been hired per year. In 2022 alone, there were 56,000 teachers throughout the state and $520 million in tax abatements, meaning each teacher could have gotten close to a $10,000 raise. Next slide. At Good Jobs First, we believe that having this data available is the first step in creating meaningful change. We have done studies and advocacy around the data like this across the nation, including in Philadelphia, New York, St. Louis, Cincinnati, and much more, to get money back into schools and public services where it belongs. For South Carolina specifically, we have several recommendations for reforming this major issue. Our first reform would be to shield school funding from tax abatements. This means that the school's share of the property tax would be off the table. No city or county would be able to abate it. Currently, Florida explicitly forbids the abatement or diversion of the school's portion of local property taxes. Maryland also does the same. We also recommend increasing transparency around these tax abatements. Like I said earlier, Google has gotten tax breaks in Berkeley County, but it's unclear how much or for how long. We advocate for the applications for tax abatements to be posted, along with company names, subsidy amounts, and hiring, wage, and investment data to ensure corporations are holding up their end of the bargain. If these are not possible, we advocate for giving school districts a formal say in these abatements, whether that is veto or voting power. We also recommend shortening the time allowed for these agreements. Like I said, some abatements can last for up to 40 years, meaning generations of students can pass through a school district without seeing a company pay its full tax bill. Again, though, I want to emphasize our main recommendation is to protect schools' funding entirely from these agreements. So thank you so much. These are the main findings of the report. I'm going to pass off to Jeremy to just show a little bit more of what we offer at Good Jobs First.
Thanks, Anya. Excuse me. Good Jobs First offers many tools from its website that allow people like the folks on this call to do their own research, right? We were able to do this research, using a large data set, but we also provide it to the public. And we provide it in a number of forms, two of which I'll go over tonight. One is Subsidy Tracker, and the other is Violation Tracker. And so we're going to learn how to track down corporate subsidies and how to look at corporate misbehavior. So the first is Subsidy Tracker. As the name suggests, it tracks economic development subsidies. We have nearly 700,000 individual awards in the database across almost 1,500 programs. About 2,800 parent companies are covered, and we update the data every 3 months. Okay, so let's talk about how to do a basic search. And if folks want to, they can follow along looking up some company in South Carolina or whatever they feel like looking at. You access the site by going to subsidytracker.goodjobsfirst.org. You can also access it from our homepage. First thing I want to point out is that you can do a basic search by company or parent. So Anya showed us earlier some subsidies to Volvo, BMW, she mentioned Google. You enter any of those entities in this company or parent field, and you'll get a list of all the subsidies like anywhere in the country. You can also search by state. So if you were to narrow it to South Carolina, then you would see the ones that you're more likely to care about. This is what the individual subsidy records look like. So when I searched for South Carolina, I got this long list of deals, starting with, you can see the $1.3 billion Scout Motors deal. I'm sure folks are aware of that, and on down the list. You can also do a geographic search. So because this is the South Carolina Education Association, I imagine a lot of you are going to want to look at subsidies in your state. The fastest way to get to it is by clicking on the geographic searches link at the bottom right, and then enter South Carolina when you have the chance. Now, I do want to point out something I said earlier, which is that in South Carolina, we collect information from public sources about which companies got the subsidies. Unfortunately, as you can see here under the highlighted yellow, most of what we find for property tax abatements, and that would be the kind of violate deals Anya was talking about, the amounts are not always disclosed. Right? Lately, some of the larger deals like the Scout Motors deal have been disclosed, but for too many deals, there's just no information about the amount. So it's really important that we continue to push for increased transparency, understand where our tax dollars are going, how many of our tax dollars are going there. You can also, once you do click on a deal, learn more information about it. So this is Ross Dress for Less, which got a subsidy in Rock Hill for about $1 million. And you can click through and find out like a little more about the deal that way. Another thing I want to talk about, which might be important for kind of getting headlines and agitating your members, is looking at what we call mega deals. So mega deals are deals that are $100 million or more in size. They often come from a number of sources: state, county, city, a number of different programs. And you can see here at the bottom of the screen, we do a lot more research about these mega deals in terms of following the news and getting more qualitative information about them, so you can understand, what the company promised and how the deal was packaged. Scout Motors, of course, at $1.3 billion, more than crosses the threshold for a mega deal. Okay, so that's Subsidy Tracker. As I think folks heard, can't really see the chat, but if there are questions here, I'm happy to answer them somehow. Somebody would have to read them to me, or we can kind of keep going and I can show you how to look at corporate misconduct.
We'll keep going. There's no questions right now. I'm going to bring on our president, Sherry East, in just a minute, who may have some questions and wants to talk about how the SCEA is partnering with Good Jobs First, but we'll continue with your presentation.
Okay, great, thanks. So the next tracker that we offer is called Violation Tracker, which, as you can see here, looks at corporate misconduct. It's a free database. We update it monthly, and it pulls from, well, we'll see in a second where it pulls from. So there's agency action. So anytime there's a regulatory agency or a settlement or a penalty or a fine from the Justice Department, from attorneys general, banking regulators, and certain large county and city enforcement agencies, we also track that too. Private litigation, so wage and hour, discrimination, things like that, we also put that in the database too. Ultimately, it's over 660,000 criminal and civil cases. We recently passed the $1 trillion mark when adding up all of the penalty amounts in the data. More than 3,000 companies, goes back to the beginning of this century, and the sources number about 450. So it's a pretty robust resource for trying to understand what corporations are doing wrong and how governments are responding. Similar to Subsidy Tracker, you can go to violationtracker.goodjobsfirst.org. You can enter a company or parent name. Here, it's a little, well, we'll see in a second how to do a geographic search, but because these are violations, largely federal violations, geography is not always as clear. So the first thing you can do is enter a company name in this box. So let's look at Giddy Tire Manufacturing, which was dinged for a Family and Medical Leave Act violation in South Carolina a couple years ago. And they have a few other violations elsewhere in the country too, one in Georgia. Okay, if you do want to know specifically about companies that were fined or penalized in South Carolina, you can, at Violation Tracker, at the bottom right, click on Advanced Search. And then in the facility state, enter South Carolina. And then this is what you get. You get a long list, again, going back. It says 5,601 Violation Tracker results found. So you could really, kind of spend a lot of time digging through these violations and seeing, which ones matter, right? And the SCEA might want to see some, other unions, Jobs with Justice, AFL-CIO. You can see a lot of entities that are interested in improving corporate behavior might want to use this data to try to understand, what corporations are up to in their state. And that concludes our presentation. Sorry again about the technical problems, but thanks for bearing with us. And I'll stop my screen now.
We got through it, so appreciate it. Lot of really interesting information there, and it seems like a lot of work done on the part of Good Jobs First to aggregate all of that data and get it out to people so people can investigate and learn exactly what was happening. I want to bring on our president, the president of the South Carolina Education Association, Sherry East. And Sherry, welcome to the live stream. I know you wanted to talk about how we're partnering with Good Jobs First and how long we've been doing that and what we're hoping to accomplish through that partnership. So I'll let you take over.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is everybody good? First of all, thank you to Good Jobs First. They first approached me probably 7 years ago and said, hey, did you realize South Carolina is losing all this money and what a tax abatement? I said, tell me more. We didn't know. And then we went to COVID. I mean, we really had a plan to roll this out. It was getting a lot of traction, actually bipartisan support from our legislators, because I think they mentioned these deals are often done at the local level within the county or within the state. And so the legislators kind of were like, yeah, let's talk about, what this is. So then we dug a little deeper and we had lots of, I would say energy around this, and then boom, COVID, and now we're back at it. So we asked them to redo the South Carolina report so we could see again where we are with tax abatements, and here we are. And we've been sharing this report out with our legislators. I spoke to a group of people in Orangeburg today, community members far and wide, because people have no idea. And then here in South Carolina, we try to push the burden on, we try to do penny sales tax here and a bond referendum here, and they fail. So a district has no other way to raise money. And then you find out that, well, your district could have all this money if some of these corporations would just pay a part of their taxes. So our ask, we have a three-tiered ask with this report. One is that school districts be held harmless and they would be able to collect these tax monies that we feel are due to them. The second one would be to involve the school districts in these deals that are going on. Oftentimes school districts, when we tell them about this, they have no idea. They didn't realize, like, oh, I had no idea we lost that much money from Honda coming to Florence County. So we want somebody from a school district, superintendent, school board, somebody to be involved in these deals when they go down. And then the third thing is no more 40-year deals without some accountability. I think people would look at BMW and say, wow, they've been a great partner in Greenville. They've done a lot of great things. They have created that workplace pipeline where they're doing the bridge programs to Clemson. They're working with Greenville Tech and all of that. But is every company doing that? You saw some of the violation trackers, which thank you, Jeremy, we asked y'all to go over. Some of the violation trackers in Chester, and I will call them out, is the GT Tire Company. They have not been the best to keep their end of the bargain on what they were supposed to do. They haven't created the jobs they were supposed to. They have lots of safety hazards. There's lots of things that go on. They're very anti-union, union busting kind of folks there. And I think the other part of this, you need to realize when these companies come to South Carolina, Todd mentioned it, we are so excited to have them here. Like, oh, wow, Oshkosh is moving to Spartanburg. Well, but we don't realize that Oshkosh left Wisconsin and decimated a city. Like Oshkosh was that town. People had lived and worked there for many years, and then they just packed their bags and moved. Another one is Boeing in Charleston. Boeing was a union shop in Washington State. Boeing packed up and moved to Charleston, South Carolina. And we invite them in. We have governors that have stood up and proudly, it's a star in our cap. We've got all these companies moving to South Carolina because you have cheaper labor, non-union status, and these companies are looking for that. They don't have to go to Mexico anymore. They can just come to South Carolina. So the other thing that I looked up with some of the companies that are here, and I urge you guys to play around on the website, urge you to send us questions. Good Jobs First has been amazing with, if you find something you want to know more, they are very speedy and on the ball with it. But the companies, some of the ones here in South Carolina, I looked up their profit margins. So, and I think we would understand if it's a mom and pop company trying to get started, of course, give them a deal for a couple years, get them, settled into South Carolina. But BMW in 2023 had $30 billion in profit. That's $1 billion profitable company that pays zero taxes into South Carolina. The GT Tire Company that was mentioned in Chester, $2.83 billion profits. That's after operating expenses, you guys. The other one that just moved to Chester was Gallo Wines. The Gallo Wine Company moved into Chester County, $5.3 billion a year company, and we would like to see some of that money head to the Chester County schools. Chester County schools, you may often hear from Pete Stone. He's one of your frequent guests on here. He did a report that Chester County High School has never held a track meet at Chester County High School because they can't afford to have a good enough track for even the kids to practice on without risking injury. So, between GT Tire and Gallo Wine, which are just two of many that were in Chester County, they could afford to do a track and field for those students. The students are suffering and the companies are not. Like, these are $1 billion a year companies. The other one I found was Volvo, $52 billion, Google, $278 billion, Continental Tire, $240 million. So I think the companies, Boeing did take a loss one year, but they're still at a $7 billion. So these aren't like struggling companies that are worried about, their bottom line, or if you don't give them this deal, they're not going to be able to hire employees or put out a product. That was the other part of this. I'm like, these aren't, struggling companies. They could afford it. Now, I think, Jeremy, and you had a story about Mississippi or a place where there's this disconnect between these companies and the communities they're moving into, that maybe if we just went to Gallo Wine or to the GT Tire Company and said, hey, we need a track and field. Did you have a story from some state? I don't know if it was Louisiana, Mississippi, that sometimes that connection, once you know this and you go make the ask, they were willing to do some things. Did you have an example of that you could share with us?
I think. I guess in my experience, I'm not really familiar with a company just having someone walk in the door and ask for something and then they say yes. But I think kind of direct action might get the goods, as they say. So I think if there's some kind of concerted demand on the part of Chester saying, like, look, we haven't been able to host a track meet in like the history of this district, and look at all this money going to this company. I think making the public case, getting the media involved, getting parents, students, teachers involved. I think, to the extent that all of that goes into the quote unquote ask you make of the company. Yeah, I think you kind of want to reduce the amount of room they have to run away from their obligations.
I want to ask the role that deregulation has had in this process, because Sherry, I think, points to something that we've seen in our country over the past couple of decades, which is and I'm not an economics professional, and forgive me for oversimplifying this, but it seems to me like you're a company, you're responsible to your shareholders to continue increasing profits and stock price, and so you have to continue to find ways to find either cheaper resources or cheaper labor. So you make the decision, we're going to move either overseas or to another state where there aren't strong labor unions, where people aren't organizing and actually demanding the kind of things you're talking about, the concessions that you're talking about, and just going to somewhere where people are a little bit more desperate, where poverty maybe is a little bit higher. So folks are just looking for some kind of job to cling to get by, and they're not as likely, because they're in a non-union state, in a right to work state. They're not going to be organizing and pushing back as much as they would in a state like, say, Washington or New York. What kind of role does that have on this discussion, and what role has deregulation played, and how can we counter that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. You kept talking about kind of desperate workers and companies playing workers in one region off another, be it state against state or country against country. I mean, it's again, I'll also apologize for oversimplifying, but yeah, I mean, getting the working class organized and getting workers organized is kind of job one. I mean, it's enormous, but it's what the left has to do. If you do it across states and someday maybe across country boundaries, then you do give corporations kind of less ability to pick and choose from among places, because everywhere they go, they're going to run into a well-organized working class. But yeah, deregulation is huge, because when you make workers desperate, when you kind of do the sorts of things that the current administration is proposing to do by slashing the welfare state, your wage is kind of all you have, right, to be able to put food on the table and healthcare and education. And you're not going to make a lot of noise to kind of upset your boss and risk losing your wage. So it's really about getting that working class organized so you can start to fight back against deregulation, get some better labor law in place, and start working your way back up. But it's an enormous task.
How have they been able to convince working folks to not stand up and demand the ability to unionize and collectively bargain? That seems to be the trick. It must be just that there's some folks, like you mentioned, are so desperate to have a job and to earn a wage that they're just, all they can think of is from a fear-based mentality, that I don't want to be the first one to speak up and lose my job, lose this thing that I have that's supporting my family and allowing me to survive. So it's about exploiting. It seems like these companies are exploiting those fears, and you have politicians who are perfectly happy to facilitate that. I've always wondered, you talked a little bit about like backdoor deals. What is happening in state legislatures and in like with governors and that kind of thing? Are there these sort of backdoor deals? I always wonder how the sausage is made. What is the incentive for politicians to do this to its people?
Sherry or Anya, do you want
I would say, I think we saw some of that, and I was really heavily involved in the GT tire. The USW came down, part of the AFL-CIO, and they tried to unionize GT tire for years. They spent a lot of money organizing. They could never get the union vote. Like for a company to unionize, you need 51% to vote that they want to bring a union in. So they were trying, they were working it, everybody was working it. And one day when they were out there trying to organize, there were loads of turkey poop, actual turkey feces that were brought in, dumped in the parking lot where the organizers were allowed to be. So there were horse flies, there were people getting bit. It was summertime in South Carolina. Can you imagine how nasty it was to have truckloads of turkey poop dumped at your work site? So it was the fear that you can't organize. We heard from many workers that were told they would be fired if they tried to organize. So, and in South Carolina, we're the lowest union state in America. Only 2% of our folks are unionized. And then you had a small group of people that were trying to do it and do the work, out of a lot of it was safety conditions. Like we heard from people, we did a workers board, and the workers would talk about their hands being put into the chemicals without the proper gloves on them. We heard about tires that were falling on people and injuring them. We heard stories of a person who died on the job. And I say, why can't we talk to that family? And they're like, oh, they already paid him off. They did a deal. They did a deal. That family's not going to talk. So we heard all of these things that were going on at one of these companies, happens to be in Chester. And I happened to be part of all of that. We partnered with them to try to get the word out. And so finally, the turnover there was so great, people quit working there. Because, in South Carolina, there are lots of manufacturing jobs. So if, the tire company's not working out for you, you could go across the street and work for Gallo Wines, who they treat their people better. Or you could go to Polyfiber, or you could go anywhere in South Carolina and find a manufacturing job right now. So the turnover was so great at that company, they just never could get enough. They couldn't get the 51% vote on the union card to get them organized, but there was effort there. There are organizers in our state from AFL-CIO, from the Nationals, from the UAW is here. South Carolina is one of the, getting ready to produce more cars here, so there are organizers. I think we keep hearing, and I think Todd's been part of this movement of, oh, we're right to work. You can't have unions. You can't. Well, that's not true. There can be unions here. We have 2 of them that live in our building. The jobs you mentioned, Jeremy, Jobs for Justice is here. We consider them a partner in some things. We also are friendly with AFL-CIO, and then the newest union we have is the USSW and the service workers. So that wouldn't be the corporations you're talking about, but that's the Dollar General folks, the Starbucks, the Pizza Hut. So there are folks that are trying to do the work here, but it's a heavy lift here in the South because it just is. It's fear, and they'll tell you they'll fire you, and they will. I mean, we saw the uprising of 34 where they took the factory workers out in the street and shot them. And so that's a real thing that happened in South Carolina. So there is a big fear of unions. There's a big fear of organizing. They're afraid they'll lose their jobs. And until we can overcome that fear, I think we're always going to struggle with that. And when you've got, like you mentioned, the legislatures talk, like I'm sure the people in Michigan fought to keep Oshkosh there. I'm sure they tried everything they could to keep that company there. I don't know what happened to that town after they left, or the place in Washington that Boeing left, or where, they're leaving those towns and coming here, and we're welcoming them with open arms without realizing what they did to another state. So I'm not sure, but our legislators have been very open to hearing this report. Like they're talking about tax reform, they're talking about more money in the budget, and this would be a way to do some of that. So we've had really a pretty decent response to your report that we've sent out. So again, thank you for all the work that you've done. And it's very thorough. It's beautiful. And we just appreciate being able to have that as one of our things in our toolbox to try to work on.
Yeah. And I could just add one more thing about these sort of like backroom deals. A lot of the times it'll be like a mayor or a county person wants to be the person who says, oh, I brought this place to South Carolina. I brought in $1 billion of investment and 500 jobs. But like we were saying earlier in South Carolina, there's no accountability with any of these tax breaks. So they can say, oh, you give us $100 million tax break a year and we'll create 50 new jobs, we'll create 100 new jobs, we'll bring up $1 billion in investment. But there's no mechanism where they have to report how many people they've hired, how much they're getting paid, if they're getting these benefits. There's none of that. So a company can essentially come in, say, you have to give me this tax break or I'm not going to locate here. But then they don't get held accountable on if they're creating jobs, if they're creating high quality jobs, or if they're bringing in the investment they promised. Just the county gets held accountable in you don't need to pay any of these taxes. So I think that's another part of it is people want to be the person who's like, I brought a company here, I brought this factory here, but they don't need to stay with the consequences or if those places are following through on their word.
Yeah, there's a successful demonization of any politician who stands in the way of that because they're seen as, you're trying to hurt economic development in our state. You're standing in the way of South Carolinians, having access to high-paying jobs. So then I think a lot of politicians are probably scared to stand up to that, even though they may see everything that you're talking about.
Or say,
I think that's right. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, and I think what we saw at the Panthers deal that went south, the Panthers deal didn't work, and that was my school district. When I reached out and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Like, make them pay." The Panthers is $1 billion enterprise. They're like, "Sherry, we weren't making any money off that land. The land was sitting there empty." And so that's the pushback I have gotten when I talk to some of the local folks. Well, Sherry, the Panthers, that investment in our community, we're getting zero. It's an empty lot. It's empty land right now. We're getting nothing from it right now. And if we could get the Panthers to come in and build their stadium, at least we'll get some, we're going to get the money from the people that spend money here coming to the games, and like you said, the industry that'll bring in the jobs that's going to create the housing and all of that. So that's the pushback they will tell you, is that it's worth it to them because it's going to make the South Carolinians' lives better. They're going to have these great jobs, which, so you do run into that sometimes with our legislators.
Jeremy, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add, I was just at a conference last week where it was about it was a journalism conference. And, we spoke with so many journalists who really want to kind of understand better how to hold elected officials and corporations accountable for these decisions. So, when you were talking about sort of the bind that corporations feel like they're in, or Anya was talking about, the kind of mayor who wants credit, or the county official who wants credit, that's fine. Like, if you do the deal and you get the credit, okay. But there needs to be some institution that's going to then check afterwards. Well, what are you getting credit for? Did the corporation do what they say they were going to do? Did the Panther investment and the economic spending and the multipliers, did that all happen? It takes a fair amount of literacy on the part of the media to make that happen. I mean, that's one thing Good Jobs First does, is we spend a ton of our time talking to reporters, and not just kind of answering questions one-off, but also educating reporters and arming them with what they need to ask these difficult but not impossible questions. And I think between, kind of reporters trying to hold elected officials and corporations accountable, and then more grassroots groups like unions kind of just making the demand for more transparency and more economic benefit, again, you kind of give elected officials and corporations a little bit less leeway to escape having to answer these questions and account for the decisions that they're making.
That's a great point. I imagine some folks watching this right now are feeling a bit discouraged because they're hearing about this, but they're also thinking we really don't have an administration at the federal level. We don't have a House, a Senate, a White House, a governor's mansion, a state house that is really going to look at it in a way to ameliorate the situation that we're describing. So I hear what you're saying, Jeremy. What's your message to folks who maybe feel discouraged right now? What are those simple steps that they can take to start fighting back and pushing back on this?
Well, I mean, that word simple is doing a lot of work there. I would say, obviously to kind of get in touch with your elected officials, the usual stuff like that. But also I would point to the last time that we had the Trump administration in office, and South Carolina has never really had a kind of friendly political environment for this sort of thing. The Red for Ed movement took off in 5 Republican states in the middle of the last Trump administration. I mean, that's not a simple task at all, but it's clear what happened, right? I mean, several teachers unions in several counties in Kentucky and Oklahoma went on strike to demand a better way of funding schools for themselves and for their students. And many of them won a lot of things. So, again, it's not simple, but I do think that there are ways to come together and just make public demands, and shut down essential services. I mean, basically kind of, strike, right? Withhold your labor and show what kind of power you have. And then elected officials and the public and the media, kind of will realize what they're up against, and then they'll come to the table.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy, I think that's your point. Your point is well made, that there's more of us than there are of them.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of people realizing the power that they actually have and using it in that collective power. I think it's just scary to get started with it, to be the one.
It is. Yeah. No, I mean, you should never be the one to get started. It should be the 10, the 100, the 50. But yeah, have those meetings and get it started.
So as we come to the end of our time, is there any that you would like to make, or resources that we'd like to share before we sign off? Start with Anya.
Definitely check out our website that we have highlighted, goodjobsfirst.org. We have several great databases We have a whole page on protecting public education that you can find on our website if you want to read more of our work. And we have done numerous school studies. Like I said, this is our third study in South Carolina. So if you want to see those trends over time, you can check out our other two studies on it. It is all encompassed in our latest study, but really check out the report and check out our website. There's a lot of great resources. And yeah.
Thanks. Sherry?
I say Red for Ed is still around. We still need to Red for Ed on Wednesdays. We start that usually during legislative session. We are in the midst of legislative session right now, and we will keep you apprised of all your legislative news. But I think this was a big awareness. Most people, when you show them this report, they are not aware that this has even happened in South Carolina. So don't be afraid to share this with anybody and everybody. And we can make it available to you. We've sent it out in our newsletters. But, you know, if you are watching and you're like, well, what do I do with this information now? Share it with someone. Share it with your neighbor. Share it with, it doesn't have to be your elected official. Share it with your church folks. Share it with your anybody. Like, the more people that know these deals are going down, I think the better off we are and the better chance we have to get our 3 asks. Remember, hold school districts harmless, or give us part of the tax deal, some accountability, and no more 40-year deals, and include the school districts in these deals. So that's our ask. We're not asking that you don't invite companies in. We know that's unreasonable. But what we are asking is for those 3 things.
Thank you, Sherry. Any final thoughts, Jeremy?
No, I think Anya and Sherry wrapped it up very nicely.
All right. Well, thanks to the 3 of you for your showing up tonight and your time. This is a really important issue. I hope that folks who are watching got some good ideas and can follow up on that, heading over to your website at Good Jobs First. I'll put that back up on the screen again. Again, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
All right, that was Sherry East, president of the SCEA, Anya Gizis, and Jeremy Thompson from Good Jobs First. And again, you can check them out right here, goodjobsfirst.org, and check out all the resources they have on this issue. Very, very important one. And you'll be able to watch this entire live stream if you just tuned in. You don't want to watch the whole thing. Of course, it'll be archived on Facebook and YouTube, but we will also be posting it on the Cool website once it's edited at cool.us, that's CEWL.us. All of our live streams, all of our information is available on our website. And of course, we want to make sure to mention that if you are interested in joining the SCEA, the South Carolina Education Association, we are proudly the state affiliate of the largest labor union in the United States, the National Education Association. You can join us at jointhescea.org. A couple of things I want to promote before we sign off. There is something called Cool Coaching, and everybody should know about this. Every public school educator in South Carolina should know about this free resource. Any teacher, it's designed for induction teachers, but really any teacher in a public school in South Carolina can access this coaching. It's free, it's online, it's one-to-one. You just log on to cool.us/coaching every Tuesday and Thursday night from 6 to 8 o'clock. They'll put you in a waiting room if all 3 rooms are full. They'll put you in a waiting room, but they will eventually get to your questions and give you the support that you're looking for. Angie Brush, Stephanie Johnson, Dr. Marcella Weinsnyder. These are 3 incredible and veteran educators who can provide you with some really good advice and feedback that you're looking for. Also want to mention we only have 2 spaces left in our first retreat for our Educator Wellness Retreat. The second one is now sold out. You can still apply for both retreats, but there's 2 spaces right now in the June retreat. No space left in July, but you can be put on a waiting list if you apply. So I want to encourage everybody to head on over to the Cool website. It's cool.us/retreat, and you can learn more about our wellness retreats and apply for it there. And if you are interested in learning more about yoga, you can check out Alex Del Castillo's Cool Yoga. He is an educator and member of the SCEA in Horry County, and he does free yoga sessions every Wednesday night. So he does Wind Down Wednesday. So he's doing it tonight. He's probably done already, but you can check out his stuff on Instagram and TikTok. The SCEA is on Instagram and TikTok. So if you use those platforms, head on over and do a search for the SCEA and make sure you follow us there. Lots of great content on those platforms. I want to thank again Jeremy Thompson, Anya Gizis, and Sherry East for being on the show tonight. And thank you for tuning in. We will have a special presentation about the SCEA's Praxis Initiative coming up. We'll be recording that on Friday, but we will release it sometime next week. So be on the lookout for that. If you know somebody who needs some support in passing the Praxis, we're going to be releasing a whole host of resources in conjunction with NEA and study.com for folks in South Carolina to access incredible resources that will help you pass the Praxis, especially for those folks who may be struggling with passing it. So we want to make sure that that test does not stand in the way of a great person becoming a public school educator here in South Carolina. Well, that's all we have for tonight. We'll see you soon on our next live stream. And until then, have a great evening. Take care.